Greetings from the Starkville Civil War Arsenal. I'm Duffy Neubauer, and today's focus is going to be on the traveling forge, the 1841 traveling forge. The forge was adopted as part of the rolling stock for the artillery in the 1840s. It went through the Mexican War and the Civil War, and most of the carriages were heavily influenced by a French design, except for the traveling forge. The traveling forge had evidence by 1839 at the Watervliet Arsenal. There was already evidence of this forge being in production. Now I hope through the magic of computers that on the screen right now will jump up a diagram of an 1852 French traveling forge. That manual is in the United States at this time, and the inside cover, it is written Fort Monroe, 1854, and the manual is dated 1852, so that we know that this double-chambered, two-chambered bellows forge far precedes what the French had in 1852. I'd like to give you a little tour of the forge, and we're going to start at the back and work forward. This box right here is the coal box. If you open it up, you can see it's full of coal. It had a capacity of 250 pounds of coal. And one significant thing that you can see very obviously is the Forge A. In the artillery, there was a code system, A, B, C, and D. The letters A and B pertain to the forges. Forge A was the one that was assigned to the field batteries, and Forge B was assigned to the field park, and that's where they kept the extra carriages, but there were two different forges used in the artillery. Letters C and D refer to the battery wagon, and we will talk about that in a later video, but today we're going to talk about specifically Forge A. So as we come around to the firebox, I have two farriers that are already here working. You can see one of the men right now is pumping the handle, which is going to lift a bellows inside, which you'll see a little bit of that a little bit later on. The air is being forced through that pipe. It's coming out in the firebox, and that is where the business end of the forge takes place. Now this is truly a traveling blacksmith shop. It had all the capabilities of any shop. They could do forge welding, no problem. They had all of the tools necessary to make bolts, nuts. They had dies and taps so they could thread. They had heading tools to make nails. They had a complete blacksmith shop here ready to go. The most critical part of any blacksmith operation is the anvil. And this anvil right here is a 120-pound anvil. And usually the anvils were placed on a barrel. They didn't attach them permanently to a block of wood because remember, this is a traveling operation, which means it has to move possibly on a daily basis. Now, when the anvil was not in use and you were traveling, the anvil was simply placed up in the firebox, and it would stay in there as they traveled. As soon as they got to their workstation, they would find another barrel or whatever they wanted to mount the anvil on. The firebox has one very, very unique feature, especially for you blacksmiths out there. There is a piece right here, it's called the air exchanger. And really what it is a ballast. If you look on the back side, you will see that this ballast is actually a big iron box. And the air comes from the piping into that box at about 1.25 inches, but it comes out the hole on this side at 3/4 of an inch. So you can see it's going in faster than it's coming out, which creates a surplus or a back pressure, which means that that box right there, that air exchanger, is under pressure, back pressure all through the piping and into the bellows. And that's why you can stop pumping and the air will continue to blow through here for about 10 or 15 seconds. All right, one thing that you can do to help yourself with a forge operation is to tilt the limber just a little bit, and that gives us a little bit more working room up here. The blacksmiths need some elbow room, so quite often they would tip the limber, gives me more room to work, and more access to go into the limber box. The limber box is where all of the tools were contained, and if you look at it up, I had 3 boxes of tools. I have a shoeing box that the farriers desperately need, and also in this box would have been 2 100-pound boxes of horseshoes. And the horseshoes were labeled a number 2 and a number 3, slightly different size. Some people are surprised to find out that in the 1860s, they used a mechanically produced shoe. It was referred to as a machine shoe. So all the farriers had to do in the field was to modify it. It was just a little bit faster for them rather than taking stock and making a shoe from the very beginning. Now I wanted to take one of the boxes out because we already talked about the Forge A being assigned to the field battery. That means that any boxes that came in would also have an A3. All the boxes were numbered, 1, 2, 3. There were specific items in each box so that when we got resupplied, which we always are going to get resupplied, anytime supplies came in and a box had the letter A on it, they automatically know where that box goes. It goes to the field battery. If it had a B on it, it would go to the field park. If it had a C or a D, it goes to the battery wagons. Now, when we're talking about horseshoes, we know that there's 2 different sizes in there, and that there's 2 boxes in here with 100 pounds. Each box is 100 pounds, which there are 90 shoes per 100 pounds of weight. So I have 200 pounds in here, and I have 100 pounds in the iron room in the forge bellows housing, which I'll show you a little bit later. But the job that probably required the most time during the operation of being in the field is shoeing horses. Now, shoes on a horse only last about 4 to 6 weeks, and then those horses have to be shod again. So that is a job that is a never-ending job, and the farriers have shoeing boxes. There's multiple shoeing boxes, and they have all the equipment. They have the rasp, the hoof cleaners, the clinch nails, whatever they needed to shoe horses, they had in their 2 shoeing boxes. And I've read one time where the Army of the Potomac went through a little over 5,000 horseshoes in 1 year. So if you have the typical 6-gun battery and they have 120, 125 horses, they all need 4 shoes per animal. It doesn't take long to go through thousands and thousands of horseshoes in a year. Well, right now I wanted to go and just show you some of the basic tools that were used that might surprise some of the blacksmith audience out there. But before I do that, I wanted to mention that the entire operation weighs a little bit over 3,300 pounds. If it's loaded with charcoal or the coal, all of the shoes, the iron, I think the manual says 3,383 pounds, which is a lot of weight, and that's why you needed 6 horses to pull this limber. Now, some of the tools that were in this box, some of the real basic tools, number 1 of them is just a rake. That allows me to rake the coal. I can push it, I can punch holes in the fire, but this rake is a very important tool to use. Obviously, all smiths had tongs. You had different tongs. I had boxes and boxes of tongs. Real critical is to have a good hammer, multiple hammers in those boxes. One of the items that is a little unusual looking, it's called a broom. And the broom is made with straw, and it's used to simply go into the quench bucket and put the fire out. At times when that fire flames up, I gotta knock that flame down. So I'm constantly keeping my fire down. A big fire that's just a big high flame doesn't give you any heat. You want a flame that's real low and cold. So that's kind of an unusual item, the broom. Then there are 3 boxes of tools, and there's all kinds of tools. They have things like bending forks, where I can put this in the hardy hole. I can put a piece of metal in there and bend it into a 90 degrees. I have cut-off tools that I can put in there, get the iron red hot, and I can cut the iron. I have different types of forming tools. If I wanted to put some type of a indentation, I can work this way and I can drive it in. So there's all kinds of different tools that can go in here. And the concept that I'm trying to get, that this is a completely self-sufficient rolling blacksmith shop. They had every tool that any blacksmith shop would have at his own home forge. Now, we've already looked at the inside of the coal box. You know that there's coal in there, but what we haven't seen yet is the inside of the bellows housing, and my two assistants here are gonna drop the coal box off for me. I'll just set that right on the ground. This gives you an idea of what the inside looks like. It's a two-chambered bellows forge that when you pump it, it'll start filling up with air. There's two flap discs or flap valves in there from the top chamber to the bottom chamber. And this is the engine that pumps the air. This area right below is called the iron room. This is where all of the flat stock, the round stock, whatever spare metal I had goes down here. I also have a shoeing box. I can put horseshoes in there, and this tray slides out. Comes all the way out. That gives me a little bit more access to the iron room. That's where I store the iron. But it's real critical that that board stay in there, because remember, this is a horse-drawn vehicle, and as we're going over real rough terrain, some of those shoes and some of those tools can jump up and they would bang into the bottom of the bellows. So that's what the main reason that this board is in here. And it just slides back in on a tray. Now, one of the things that's convenient is if you take the coal box off the back of the forge and bring it up closer to your fire, when you're working the fire, it's much easier to go from the coal box, which is right here, and get the coal for the fire than to go walking to the back of the forge all the time. And one of the things I don't know if I talked about earlier was the vise. You need a good vise in a blacksmith shop. This is referred to as a Tong Vise because it's attached to the tongue. And then I also, one little feature is I have a quench bucket. If you're going to be doing blacksmith work, you have a quenching bucket where I can cool off all the material that I've been using if I have to handle it. Now, what I'd like to do is just show you a little bit of the process of smithing. Obviously, it's coming out of the fire, and what I'm going to do is just start drawing a point on it. You can see what I'm doing. I'm working that down into a tapered point. Might turn these into tent pegs so I can use them a little later on. But that just gives you an idea. This is a short video, but we wanted to see, or let you see, the process of getting the metal hot, forging it with a hammer, reshaping it, and just continue to work like that. And you can see the farriers would have done the same thing with a horseshoe. They would have taken these shoes, heated them up, and then forged them or shaped them to fit each particular hoof. Now, one thing I'd like to just briefly talk about is the different types of artificers. And I talked about artificers in the battery, and those were the men that did all of the maintenance and repair. And an artificer is a skilled craftsman. And there were three disciplines when the war started: an armorer, who was a blacksmith, a saddler who did the leather work, and a carriage maker who did the woodworking. But they found out very, very quickly, with the large armies, 1 million men in the field, they needed farriers also. The idea was in the beginning that the blacksmiths could do all of the blacksmith work and the farrier, and he just simply couldn't do that. So the army ended up hiring farriers specifically. And when you see old photographs, if you see men wearing an apron not only did keep their clothes a little cleaner, but it also shielded them. They're working with extremely hot material, and the leather apron protected them. But you can always tell the difference between a farrier and a blacksmith by their apron. Usually a blacksmith had a full-bodied apron the farriers had a split in their apron. If you open up your legs there a little bit, you can see it split. And the reason that that split is in there, a farrier has to bring a hoof in between his legs to do that work on the shoe. And if he has a nail that's not been clinched and that horse would pull his hoof through and cut him in the leg, he could bleed to death. So his apron had to have a split in it so he could do some work with the shoe coming through his legs and hold that leg together. Well, that about covers the introduction to the traveling forge. It's a short video, but hopefully that we've introduced you to something new and different. And if you'd like to know any more about the traveling forge, or if you had questions, feel free to contact me through my website. I'd be happy to talk with you. And I'd like to thank you for watching the video. And at this time, I'd like to stay and visit with you some more, but my time has come and it's time for me to get back to work. Goodbye, and I hope to see you in another video sometime in the future.